Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we're looking at Fossils, a very short introduction by Keith Thomson, who was Senior Research Fellow for the American Philosophical Society and is a professor of natural history at Oxford University, as well as the author of about a dozen books on evolution. And we are looking at a fossilized trilobite from Morocco. This little guy is anywhere between a quarter to half a billion years old. Pretty cool. This book is one from a series by Oxford University Press, offering dozens of introductory texts on everything from art, philosophy, and religion to science and history. Here's another one, and I assume they all look like this. For collecting's sake, I really hope so. Hey, comment below if you own or have read any of these Oxford University Press books, and let me know what you think of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. This particular book is 10 chapters covering various aspects concerning fossils, paleontology, and evolution. We begin by trying to get into the minds of the public and academia before we really had any understanding of what fossils were. In retrospect, it seems so obvious what they are, but we have to remember that hundreds of years ago, our picture of our universe was very different. This was a time when pretty much everyone assumed that an omnipotent being must have created all living things perfectly and in their present state. The old idea that every animal was created as part of a great hierarchical chain or ladder seemed reasonable, but the idea of what we now know fossils to be today seriously challenged their concepts of how their world worked. And back then, there was a lot of contention on what these things might be. The idea that any species, or let alone many, would go extinct, or that species derived from other species, would have seemed outrageous. They had no way of knowing that the Earth was billions of years old. When we get into how science and discovery changed the way we view our world, I can't help but think of a line from that movie Men in Black. 1,000 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, they knew that the Earth was flat. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. I always really liked that line. But the book continues to move ahead in time and talk about how our growing understanding of fossils was coinciding and building upon other evidence for evolution. And then, on November 24th, 1859, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. Between that, all the fossils, morphological analysis, geographic distribution, and systematics in general coming more into focus over time, the support for evolution becomes pretty difficult to ignore. And then, of course, with the advent of DNA analysis, there's just no longer any question. But this book actually disappointed me in a couple respects. I was looking forward to learning more about the different types of rocks and geological concepts like sedimentary deposition, but these things are absent from this book, other than a single mention of diagenesis. So I was pretty bummed about that. Another thing that surprised me about this book is that there's no section on radiocarbon or potassium argon dating. I figured that a book called Fossils would surely be talking about dating, but it's only mentioned very briefly. The book does go into a few evolution concepts, such as key innovation, a minor change that greatly opens up new possibilities for niche filling and affecting species diversity and the speed of evolution. Look at a feather, which began for the purposes of heat regulation, and we know what took place from there. Another good example is the tetrapod limb evolving from the fins in the Devonian period, increasing mobility in shallow waters or waters with changing levels, conferring major advantages, what we now call arms and legs. Then we have living fossils, the things like the coelacanth or the horseshoe crab, for example, and questions on why they've changed so little over time and why they have persisted for so long. One of the concepts Thomson brings up, correlated progression, was actually developed by Keith Thomson, and I'd never heard of it before, so it's pretty cool to read about that. This is the idea that multiple traits evolve together as more of a system than independently, not to be confused with Darwin's correlated variation. The book goes on to questions that arise from the fact that fossilization is such an unlikely event. All the conditions have to be just right for this to take place, and many parts of animals are far less likely to fossilize, i.e., soft parts, leaving massive holes in the fossil record. This leads to one of the more famous controversies in evolution, Stephen Jay Gould's punctuated equilibrium, which says that evolution proceeds in jerks, where we have relative stagnation for a while, then major change, and repeating like that. Is this an artifact of a spotty fossil record or a reflection of actual natural processes? I have to say, this book does have more questions than answers. And I hate to criticize this author, but I'll always give you a honest review. And I did feel like punctuated equilibrium is a pretty apt metaphor for how I felt reading this book. There are some pretty interesting parts, but there's space between some rather dull reading, in my opinion. There were more interesting parts than dull parts, to be sure, so the dull parts were the punctuation. But out of the works on evolution that I've read, this book wouldn't be among the highly recommended because I just didn't find the writing very riveting, and evolution is one of my favorite subjects to read about. This book also has some very dated parts in it as well. Fossils, a very short introduction, features a section on human evolution, and this is a case where the age of the book is a problem. Paleoanthropology is a very fast moving field, and this book was published in 2008. That was before the Denisovans were discovered, so there isn't any mention of them in here. Kind of important. There's also some statements in this book which time has shown to be wrong, such as that it looks like humans and Neanderthals didn't interbreed. Well, we now know that they indeed did interbreed. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. I didn't bother to look at the publishing date of this book until I was about halfway through it, but I did tell myself months ago that when it comes to paleoanthropology, I'm not going to read anything that was published before around 2020, unless I have a special reason, because I don't want to confuse myself with outdated information on this very fast-moving field. This is a problem encountered in science reading that I've been wanting to talk about in a video, and it gets pretty deep, all the way down to, is this the best way to be spending my time? It's a problem that reared its head in Fossils, A Very Short Introduction by Keith Thomson. But this isn't a criticism against the author, this is just how science works. And don't think that that's a criticism against science either, because the discovery and correction of any error is another part of that science, which is one of the things that makes it so wonderful. And speaking of wonderful science, I can tell you that the next book I'm going to read is excellent because I've read it before, and I'm shocked to see that nobody's reviewed it yet. So definitely check out my next review coming in maybe a week, give or take a couple days. Okay, that's it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. This book was worth reading, but ultimately a bit of a letdown. It's a good enough book for its time. It's just that it was missing some things that I was hoping for, though it did have several parts that intrigued me or made me smile or laugh. The end features some pretty intriguing commentary on 50 to 100 million years down the road from now. What would any geologist make of the geological strata that's being laid down right now? Between us moving thousands of species all over the planet and leaving plastics everywhere, any geologist of the future would have a very interesting job ahead of them. Do you guys know of any good books on fossils or geology? If you do, I really encourage you to tell us about it in the comments. This book is best read by somebody who identifies as an evolution nerd. If that's you, check out Fossils, A Very Short Introduction by Keith Thomson.